I mentioned you're on your own. When what I meant by that was you were with ESPN for a while, left ESPN. You've started Meadowlark, have this entire network. In terms of blowback from people about your opinions, politics, have you found it to be a lot easier to deal with out on your own than when you were with ESPN? I mean, there was the famous story with ESPN where you got in trouble because you had said things about Trump, who had said people should go back to where they came from, which I found preposterous that you'd get in trouble for that. How freeing is it that you don't have to worry about that now?
It is nice not to have corporate overlords. I've never wanted to have corporate overlords. I've always aspired to be my own boss. So now we can say and do what we want. It's one of the primary reasons that I went with DraftKings and not behind a paywall, and not one of these many companies that has a ton of money but has league partnerships with the NFL or anybody else that wouldn't allow me to speak freely. Now that almost every decision you make any day can have its compromises or its conflict of interest, from the car you drive to whether you recycle. There are all to who it is that your partners are. I'm sure there are many people out there who would say, look at this guy, former journalist, gasbagging from on high on his sanctimonious platform while working for a gambling company or there are all sorts of moralities that can apply or be applied, and anybody out there can look at what I'm doing and cast their own judgments. But the reason that we did it was to get maximum freedom, because I didn't want to be governed by anyone else's sensibilities, and renting my father's accent was not buying my voice.
I'm sure now when you left ESPN and decided to go out on your own, I would assume you had many, many offers from different companies.
Yeah, we had options that were nice. It was nice. It was a difficult thing to do during a pandemic, but yeah, there were multiple offers because coming out of ESPN, we have a popular thing that is pretty easy to monetize.
Were you at all surprised, even just a little bit, of how much your loyal audience followed you after you left ESPN? And how good that feels?
I can't believe that we get to do any of this. I can't believe that this gets to be a career, that it gets to be a playpen, that I'm 53 years old, and that any of this is stuff that can be profitable. And yes, I am surprised and always surprised by the allegiance of our audience. But when we were negotiating with ESPN, and Jimmy, a lot of people don't understand. They just don't understand the deal we made. But we got our intellectual property. We got our feeds. We were able to go. ESPN could have done a great deal of damage to my career and my business in the early stages of buyout negotiations, when the Disney lawyers suggested, well, just pay him all the money and sit him. Right. But that's not the way they wanted to do it. They were willing to do it in a way that was closer to amicable, and they just gave us all our stuff, our feeds. So the next day, this I don't know whether it has a lot of precedent, but it's a pretty unusual thing to go from you just broadcast on somebody else's network the day before, and the next day all your stuff is yours and you can just keep bringing it to the audience. That's specific to this time and this place, and I do not think that I'm so unique in this market to not be surprised that all of those people came with us, or that any of that was available to us.
That was very gracious of ESPN to give you the feed, because that could be a thing where companies make a big stink about something like that. So.
Well, you imagine, though, if we had just disappeared for 18 months in the climate of now, and the climate of people need instant gratification, they need 7 sources in their devices of entertainment, and the people who are most addicted to what we do saying that the 4 hours a day we're doing isn't enough, that they want more. So
yeah, it's funny you say that, because I'm thinking about Rachel Nichols, because I personally thought she got a raw deal on that whole thing, but she was gone for a while, and now she popped up last week, and you're like, oh yeah, Rachel Nichols, forgot about her, but it does seem like she's the type of person I know you would have been able to do this, where she's going to be able to pick up where she left off. I think even with a little break, you would have been able to do that. I think certain people can get away with it, you being one of them, but you don't want to be away for that long if you're doing what we do.
I don't assume it, though, because this is a very competitive space, and The space I now occupy is a young person space. So I don't simply assume that jumping from that platform, which can make anybody matter, I did not assume that it would just be during a pandemic of all things, when the content industry, as you see it, right, is you see the struggles of Netflix, of HBO Max, of the economy, you see everything happening in the world right now, and I am thankful that you think that I would have landed anywhere on my feet fine, but I did not presume that.
Right.
It was very much a leap of faith and a scary one.
Yeah. Well, a big reason I say that is, as I mentioned earlier, you have a rabid and loyal fan base. I've actually experienced it a little bit just in, whenever I've written about the show or I've had Stu Gatz on the podcast. If you can offer me and my listeners any tips, advice, what do you think the secret is to building such a loyal fan base? If you had any advice about that.
Okay, so it's a broad question. I believe our authenticity is probably something in there that people enjoy, self-deprecation and humor, but the people who ride with us most ferociously tend to think, I would say, it's not just that they like something or that they, this is a very intimate medium and we can be the friends inside your head. It's much different than everything else. It's different than television. It's different than writing. It's even different than radio, although we have some holdovers from radio as well. We exist by your choice when you're exercising, when you're running, when you're bored, when you're at a bad job, when you're lonely, when you're going through a dark time. None of this answers your question, but there are a lot of places where you can be sticky with an audience because they feel like they really know you, as opposed to just watching something on television or enjoying an experience in entertainment. They feel like you're accompanying them during their lives and they feel like they know you a little bit. So when I get asked and this happens all the time to me, doctors, lawyers, or successful people who are like dissatisfied with whatever their livelihood is because they know that beast too well and they'd like to do something different, they look at what we're doing every day and they say, well, I want to do that. I love sports, talking about sports with my friends. That's a hobby. That's fun. And a lot of people could do it, but that bridge you're talking about to the stickiness of loyalty, of finding an audience and having that audience stay with you for reasons like this that have nothing to do with entertainment. They saw how we left ESPN. They saw that ESPN let go of my mentor's son or a friend of mine's son, and that we hired him back. And when you connect from that place, right, where they're like, well, Dan's not going to let Chris Cody be fired. Dan's not going to let Chris Cody get gobbled up by the machine. When the connection is there, I'd argue, Jimmy, that, and I do not say this with ego. I say it with gratitude, but it's hard to say and not sound like I'm saying it with ego. I don't believe like there's been a whole lot in the history of this medium that has our loyalty. I agree. The rabid loyalty that starts somewhere near your soul that has more to do with the soul than it does with even the ears or the eyes.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think there's only like 3 or 4, entities like that around, and you guys are in that class. You mentioned ESPN firing Cody. If that doesn't happen, are you still at ESPN?
No, there would have been something else. That my contract was about to run up. I think it would have been up this past August, a couple of months ago. There were things shrinking there, and we were being confined there in ways that were not comfortable to me, or there wasn't enough freedom there. I've never negotiated money. I've never negotiated power. I've negotiated the freedom to do what I want. And so by the end there wasn't enough freedom. If it wasn't that, but right before that, there was something involving moderation of a Joe Biden in Miami with Florida Cubans that I wanted to do as a journalist, just as a moderator. There were any number of things that were going to pop up politically and otherwise that were going to make it in some way or another, probably, if not untenable to me, untenable to them, because I wasn't going to stay quiet over the last 2 years of what has happened in America just because for some reason somebody wanted me to talk about Francisco Lindor.
I don't know how much you're willing to pull back the curtain, but I'm going to try here. I'm just curious. towards the end there with ESPN, those last couple of years, I guess starting with the incident when Trump said go back to where you came from, and you talked about that. How often was there headbutting with executives at ESPN over content? Was it a regular thing? Was it a once in a while thing? Was it always about politics? Did anything, did it ever come up about bashing sports or ESPN or, media? What was the relationship like those last 2 years in terms of battles?
I generally would say that I come from privilege in this regard. So I have a different relationship with this than perhaps even Stephen A. Smith did. I had a lot of conversations with Stephen A., who played the game better with executives than I did and did a better job of navigating the corporate labyrinth, because when you say how often was it happening, once is too much for me. Now, that doesn't mean it's that way for everyone, and you got to eat some shit when you have bosses, but no, I don't, and no, I won't. And so any amount is too much, and it happened on politics, but it also happened because they've got corporate agreements with Dana White and Rob Manfred, and I'm running on the wrong side of those as well. And I don't care that I'm running on the wrong side of those, and other people get in trouble when I run on the wrong side of those. So any amount would have been too much, and it happened more often than I would have liked, but I don't know that anyone listening to this or anyone who's worked in this field wouldn't say, well, quit being a baby. You got to eat a certain amount of shit from your boss. That's how it works. Otherwise, you'd be your own boss, which is why I am now my own boss.
Right. Exactly. And it's funny. I've interviewed a lot of WWE wrestlers over the years, and whenever I interview a WWE wrestler, I ask them for a Vince McMahon story, because I think he's one of the most unique and fascinating people in the history of entertainment. And multiple times I've gotten stories from them where, in dealing with Vince and battling Vince over something, whatever it is, storyline, salary, Vince has a line that he often uses, supposedly, where he says, sometimes in life you've got to eat shit. So I like the fact that you're saying, no, you don't.
There are compromises it took me, I'm 53 years old, right? Like, it took me a long time, and I had to do a lot of different things to arrive at what it is I have now, which is 30 employees and a lot of responsibilities and a lot of headaches that I didn't have at ESPN. I've never had employees before. I've never wanted to have employees before. And there are many things ESPN does well, and there are many places that ESPN can protect you. But in the conflict of where America was at the time and asking me to sit out brown babies in cages at the border, or with my particular past of coming from exiles who had to flee for freedom and had to fight for freedom. It was not a birthright. It is front of lobe at all times. You can't ask me to sit out China stuff because you got theme parks in China. You can't ask me to sit out communism and threats to freedom and threats to democracy, when I never wanted to work for the corporate overlord. I never wanted to be beholden to what anyone else's voice was on that front.
Yeah. I've written this and I've said this. I thought in your particular case, what I found absurd about that whole situation was, when you're doing radio, I'm not saying this to you, you know radio better than anyone, but when you do radio, it's an intimate medium. And I think radio, even sports talk radio, is more than just sports talk. I mean, I grew up in New York listening to Mike and the Mad Dog. If you poll New Yorkers who listen to Mike and the Mad Dog, they loved when Mike and the Mad Dog would talk about movies and the Oscars more than sports. I mean, it's just this thing where it's just sports. Now, you mentioned your background. I don't understand how any executive, knowing what your background is, Cuba, Trump goes on a stage and says, go back to where you came from, and you're on the radio in this personal, intimate medium, and you're just supposed to ignore it. I get where ESPN's coming from in a way, because they're terrified of Trump and MAGA, and they don't want the backlash and being on Fox News, blah, blah. But that happened anyway. They weren't, by stifling someone, it didn't cause them. I mean, they have this reputation, which I think is absurd, but they have this reputation now of being like this liberal network that is basically what the Biden administration. I mean, it's just a completely absurd take. But that's what the result is, even with them trying to stifle you. It just never made any sense to me, just as an outsider who observes media, to ask you not to do it, given your history, background, and you're doing radio.
Well, I can make the argument that I was hired to do it and that I didn't change. Either the company or the country changed. But there was very much a change where I fell on the wrong side of corporate policy because I was not to talk about that stuff, because the dangerous thing tended to be at ESPN the setting of precedent, that if I get to talk about it, then you've got to allow somebody else to talk about it. And this goes back to like Dan Patrick wanting a television in his office when he was hosting the biggest sports show in America, and he was told, no, you can't have one because then everybody's going to want a television in their office. And it's just it's a better way to not establish precedents, is an easier way to lead. And I was told, I mean, you've seen this, Jimmy, they've gone to commercials there where it says they're going south here. And I love Marty Smith. God bless. Give me more Marty Smith. I'm here for more Marty Smith. But the idea of commercials, when ESPN used to make the biggest, best commercials, and now the commercials are, we're going south here on this. They are trying to get the college football demo, which you can't blame them for. It's great business for them. Why wouldn't they want the college football demo? They're in the business of customers, and many of the customers are tired of their analysts slanting things with whatever their politics are. So I understand why Disney specifically, Disney in the fantasy business would say, no, thank you. Do not want those headaches. Not worth it. You're disposable. We'll find somebody else. We'll find somebody else who does it without the headaches, because we can put on anybody here and make them famous, because we're still the four letters that matter in sports.